The billionaire returned early. The maid whispered, "Be quiet." The shocking truth was revealed. Grace knelt in the sun-soaked garden of the Wells estate, her fingers tracing the delicate edges of the rose petals. The vivid colors seemed to bloom brighter under the afternoon sun, but her mind was clouded with worry. Just as she pruned the blooms, she heard a car crunching gravel, a sound unmistakably familiar. Panic rose in her throat. Carter Wells had returned from his business trip a day early. She wiped her hands on her apron, irritation and fear twisting together, gripping her heart with a vice-like tension. Was Emily nearby? She didn't want to be seen in disarray, especially not now. With a quick glance toward the mansion's entrance, Grace steeled herself, unsure of how their previously peaceful dynamic would shift with Carter's early arrival. Carter's heavy footsteps echoed as he crossed the threshold, and Grace felt the air grow thick with unspoken words. No amount of dusting the elegantly lined shelves in the drawing room could distract her thoughts. She thought about Emily, the turbulent waters she navigated after her parents' bitter divorce, and the way her laughter had once painted a brighter hue across this mansion. The whispered conversation she overheard between Carter and Emily invaded her thoughts, their voices hushed, yet charged with raw emotion. The tension simmering inside the mansion prepared Grace for a confrontation she didn't foresee. She had built walls, a fortress of independence as a single mother, with a 9-year-old boy relying on her. But this job, this family, meant so much more than just a paycheck. It was her lifeline. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Each second extended into an eternity as she considered slipping away, letting the moment pass. But she couldn't turn her back when she sensed someone vulnerable needed her. An unsettling pull drove her to Emily, who was experiencing the weight of her father. A father whose powerful presence loomed over their lives with authority and disappointment. "Hey," Grace had dared to say, her voice a warm whisper. "I know things are tough, but you've got a spark inside you. Don't let that dim." The moment her words hung in the air, she felt an electric jolt of fear rippling through her, knowing Carter's gaze would be fierce and disapproving. Her heart raced as she saw his reaction, an avalanche ready to erupt. The gleam of that moment, shared with Emily, solidified Grace's growing resolve, yet it also deepened her fear. Because in that silence, unspoken truths trembled on the edge of exposure. The scandal threatening the lives of the workers entwined in Carter's reckless business dealings. To confront him could mean losing everything. The lines of her life, her dignity, her son's future, all began to blur under the pressure. Choices loomed over her like storm clouds moving in. Would she help challenge a man perceived as untouchable? Would she risk it all for the sake of justice, even if it meant losing Emily's newfound friendship? With their budding connection simmering in the air, Grace felt the heat of potential ruin lock her in place. The stakes hadn't just risen, they had ignited. A storm was on the horizon, and she was at its center, ready to choose her path. But at what cost? The tension in the mansion grew palpable, wrapping around Grace like a thick fog, immobilizing her thoughts. The pull between her responsibilities as a mother and her moral compass gnawed at her with a relentless fury. She stood at a crossroads, the weight of her decisions pressing heavily upon her. Each heartbeat echoed the fear that she would be swept away by the powerful current of Carter's influence if she didn't act soon. She inhaled deeply, pulling the fragrant scent of roses into her lungs, grounding herself in the moment. She could almost hear the soft encouragement of Emily's laughter, a reminder of the girl's untapped resilience. Yet, as she glanced towards the mansion, she sensed a shadow creeping over that joy. Carter's return, once just a concern, transformed into a waking nightmare, as the potential consequences of her choices settled like lead in her stomach. Guilt trickled into her thoughts like poison. Could she really tell Emily to be brave while fearing for her own job? Help was one thing, but inviting confrontation with Carter Wells was something entirely different. The billionaire had an arsenal of influence, and she was just a maid, an invisible thread in his opulent tapestry, but that same thread could unravel something larger if tugged in the right direction. The thought ignited a flicker of boldness within her. What if she didn't have to stay in the shadows, submitting to his whims? Perhaps she could illuminate the truth, become a catalyst for change instead of a passive onlooker. The tendrils of risk still loomed ahead. Yet the more she pondered, the more she felt her resolve grow. She turned away from the garden, her heart pounding with purpose. Each step toward the kitchen was an invitation to face her fears, and she welcomed that tension, embracing the storm swirling within her. Maybe confronting Carter wouldn't lead to destruction. Perhaps it was the only way to empower herself and others like her. As she entered the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator accompanied her thoughts. She glanced at the reflection in the polished appliances and barely recognized the woman staring back. The warmth and kindness she once wore like a cloak felt overshadowed by an unfamiliar fierceness. The kitchen radio played softly, a distraction against the rising tide of anxiety. Words danced through the air, familiar songs of empowerment and resilience that resonated with her situation. The lyrics ignited something within, reminding her that change was often initiated by those willing to challenge the status quo. Enough, she whispered to herself, fists clenched. She would gather her courage, confront Carter, and find a way to protect Emily and the others at risk. The stakes were undoubtedly enormous, but this was about more than just her job. It was about standing for what was right. Feeling a rush of adrenaline mixed with a hint of fear, Grace found herself at the threshold of the drawing room, ready to face whatever awaited her. The air crackled with potential, vibrant with confrontation, yet soaked in apprehension. She was not just a maid anymore. She was becoming a voice against silence. But then, just as she prepared to step in, she caught a glimpse of Carter through the sleek glass of the door. He was deep in conversation, his demeanor unyielding, authority radiating from him like a storm cloud ready to burst. The tension within her tightened once more, her mind racing as she thought of the consequences, her heart reluctant to move forward. Was she truly ready for the fallout? As she wrestled with her fears, the question lingered like an ominous shadow. What path would she choose, and what echoes would follow in its wake? With her heart racing, Grace took a step inside, prepared to confront the man whose influence could shatter everything she held dear. The moment of truth was upon her, but the storm was just beginning. Grace stepped into the drawing room, her breath hitching as the contrast of the luxurious space and her whirlwind of emotions collided. Carter stood with his back to her, his commanding presence filling the room. She took a moment to observe him from afar, the slight movement of his shoulders as he spoke animatedly gesturing to a piece of art that adorned the wall. A world away from her own reality, and it needs to be bold, assertive, he was saying, his voice smooth yet laced with authority. An overt power play that leaves no room for doubt. Every instinct in Grace screamed for her to turn around, to retreat into the familiarity of the kitchen where she could put distance between them. Yet, she felt an unwavering pull toward him, the ambiguity of her role in this household coiling around her stomach like a serpent. With a flicker of defiance, she pressed on, stepping fully into the room and past the threshold of her uncertain resolve. "Mr. Wells," she said, her voice steady, though she could feel the tremor beneath. The conversation halted, and Carter turned sharply, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that could drop the temperature in the room. "There you are," he said coolly, the hint of an amusement flickering across his face. "And to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" "There's something we need to discuss," she replied, finding strength in her conviction. The air grew thick, a prelude to the confrontation she had stewed over, a battle fought not just with words but with the very fabric of her self-worth. Is that so? He raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms, a silent challenge in his demeanor. You're stepping out of your role, Grace. This is not your place. Her heart thundered against her ribcage at the condescension in his tone, the weight of his privilege as crippling as the idea of retreat. The steady pulse of determination surged through her. She wasn't merely a maid, she was a mother, a protector, an unwilling participant in a troubling game. I may be just a maid in this house, she shot back, feeling the fire igniting within her. But I won't allow you to exploit those who have no voice. The room fell silent, and for a moment, Grace thought she saw a flicker of surprise in his expression, quickly masked by a cold smile that sent shivers down her spine. Do you think your opinion matters in this realm, Grace? He taunted, his tone switching to a more patronizing cadence. You are out of your depth. Instead of withering beneath his gaze, Grace found purpose in the challenge. You underestimate the power of the unseen, Carter. People like me, they carry stories and dreams, and we can do more together than apart. You just refuse to see it. Panic wrestled with her newfound resolve. What if he dismissed her once more, shattering the fragile barrier she had erected around her dignity? But instead of fearing his rejection, she dared herself to press on. Carter stepped closer, his breath grazing her skin like a cold wind. What do you hope to accomplish, Grace? His voice was low, dangerous, yet she sensed a begrudging curiosity beneath the layers of his arrogance. Change. It was a simple statement, yet it echoed with the weight of her truth. The word hung in the air, a haunting promise of upheaval. Not just in her life, but for all those caught in his web of influence. Change? He scoffed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty creeping into his expression, as if her words were potent enough to challenge the very foundations of his empire. In that charged moment, Grace realized she had ignited something within herself, a courage sharper than steel, one that could carve out pathways of possibility. But would it be enough against the relentless tide of Carter's ambition? Your empire is built on the backs of those who work quietly in the shadows, she continued, emboldened. But shadows can cast light too. You may think your power is insurmountable, but it's not invincible. Carter's eyes narrowed as he absorbed her words, the smirk faltering. The challenge had been thrown, the stakes raised higher than either of them anticipated. The atmosphere bristled with tension, an electric anticipation as the storm within each of them swirled dangerously close. Would he retaliate? Would he begin to grasp the undercurrents of unease rippling around him? As Grace braced herself for his response, a vivid picture of newfound possibility flashed through her mind. A vision of what could emerge from this confrontation. But as she stood there, the reality loomed. Conflict was upon them, and she was no longer simply a spectator to her own life. The moment teetered on a knife's edge as Carter opened his mouth to reply. But what would his words unleash? Would they fracture her resolve, or fortify it in ways she had yet to fathom? A new chapter awaited, and Grace was ready to write it in her own hand. Carter's silence hung in the air, a tangible tension that suffocated the room. Grace held her breath, waiting for the words that could either sever her newfound strength or bolster it. In that moment, time felt suspended, drawing out the small nuances of their exchange. The flicker of discontent in Carter's eyes spoke volumes, a crack in his armor. Change? He finally murmured, a trace of mockery returning to his tone. In a place like this? You must see how naive you sound. Naive. The word cut deeper than she anticipated. Grace felt her defenses waver, but quickly rallied against the inner doubt. Maybe, she replied, her voice unexpectedly steady. But sometimes it takes the foolish to challenge the mighty. Carter took a step back, his expression shifting as if assessing her anew, a blend of surprise and intrigue clouding his sharp features. You think you can rally those around you? Those you claim to uplift? You really believe they'll follow? Why should they trust you? The questions swirled in her mind, each striking a delicate chord of truth and exposure. Because I see them, she replied, each word laden with sincerity. I know their struggles. There is strength in numbers, Carter. If I can ignite hope in even one of them, then I can challenge your authority in ways you can't fathom. The moment stretched taut, their gazes locked in a silent battle. Could he see the truth in her plea? With every second, Grace was fully aware of the precariousness of their exchange, how quickly it could tilt into devastation if she faltered. Yet where doubt had once tightened its grasp, determination surged, compelling her to forge ahead. Carter raised an eyebrow, as if weighing the gravity of her words. Rallying a flock of disillusioned souls isn't as simple as you make it sound. They lack the very will to rise, Grace. You think they'll abandon their comfort for a dream? A fire ignited in Grace, glowing brightly in the depths of her chest. Comfort does not equal fulfillment. Those lives are bound in quiet desperation, waiting for someone to believe that change is possible. They just need a spark. His lips twisted into a sardonic smile as he resumed his previous stance, all too aware that the ground beneath him was shifting. And you think you're that spark? The mockery felt heavy, but she wouldn't let it sway her. I know I am. This assertiveness, this inner strength, surprised even her. She could see the twinkle of uncertainty flaring behind his careful mask, a hint of calculation as he reconsidered this unexpected rival. Grace narrowed her eyes, feeling an ancestral wisdom flicker within her. The generations before her had faced darker nights. As a mother, she bore the undeniable desire to protect what was hers. Dismiss me all you want, but don't dismiss them. They deserve better than to be pawns in your game. Amusement turned to irritation on Carter's face, but he remained silent. Instead, he asked a different sort of question. If you're serious about this uprising, and I take you seriously for a moment, what's the first step you'd take? The idea slithered into her mind like mercury, sharp and fluid. I'll begin by bringing them together. They need to see the strength in unity. Good luck with that, he retorted, his voice dripping with skepticism. She felt the resolve harden within her. This was more than personal. It had spread to something larger. I will not cower. I will gain their trust, tell them my story, and show them they're not alone. Carter's demeanor flickered again, a crack in the facade. Was it doubt creeping into his mind? And if they reject you? His words hung like a dagger in the air, and Grace allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Then I'll keep pushing. They will need to understand that the first step is to find their own voice. Something shifted between them, a delicate thread binding their intentions and desires. As she held his gaze, the enormity of the moment pressed down upon them both. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to unravel the layers of his arrogance. The clock on the mantel ticked audibly, each second weighted with implications. Would this be the moment they pivoted toward transformation? Just then, the distant sound of footsteps echoed through the hall, drawing their focus. The approaching noise shattered the charged tension, and Grace's heart raced as she realized the arrival of someone unexpected could change everything once again. Who was it? Would they be an ally or an adversary? Carter's expression morphed, annoyance and curiosity mixing together. Looks like we have company, he remarked, turning slightly as if to gauge the approaching presence. Grace's pulse quickened further. This could decide everything. What would confrontation and revelation bring next? The stakes had never felt higher, and she stood on the edge of an unveiling, uncertain of what awaited her in the shadows. The footsteps grew louder, reverberating against the cold stone walls. Grace's heart thundered in her chest as the door swung open, revealing an unfamiliar figure. A woman, perhaps in her mid-30s, with striking features and an air of authority that instantly shifted the room's energy. Grace instinctively analyzed the newcomer, seeking any sign of how this shift would impact her burgeoning plans. "Who are you?" Carter's voice dripped with a mixture of arrogance and defensiveness, breaking the silence that hung dangerously between them. The woman, unfazed by Carter's tone, simply stepped forward. "I'm Janelle. I received word there was a situation brewing here." She turned her penetrating gaze toward Grace, a flicker of recognition passing between them, as if they were both aware of something deeper, unspoken. Grace felt her purpose solidify. Perhaps this was the unexpected ally she needed, a chance to switch the narrative away from Carter's dominion. "I'm Grace," she introduced herself, quickly assessing Janelle's demeanor. "I was just—" Grace hesitated, unsure of how to steer this new dynamic, but the urgency of the moment pressed against her. "I'm gathering strength to push for change." "Change?" Janelle repeated, her brow arching slightly. "What exactly do you intend to change?" "People need to find their voices. They need to see that they're not alone in their struggles," Grace replied, a newfound confidence rising within her. She felt as though she were treading a delicate line, but she was ready to step forward. Carter's silence resumed, watching the interaction play out, his skepticism palpable. But to Grace, Janelle seemed intrigued, eyes narrowing as she absorbed Grace's words. "People often require a catalyst," Janelle said, her tone measured and engaging. "They need direction and authenticity. If you're proposing to be that voice, are you prepared for what comes next?" "Every step I take is closer to unlocking their potential," Grace declared, steeling herself against Carter's disapproving gaze. "I need to prove that our history doesn't dictate our future." "Proving it won't be easy," Janelle warned, crossing her arms. "You'll face pushback, not just from him," she gestured vaguely at Carter, "but from the very people you hope to rally. They'll be fiercely protective of their comfort zones, even if it suffocates them." The words struck Grace like a physical blow, but they ignited a fierce determination within. "I can be persistent. I can show them a different path," she responded, fervor in her voice. "It might be a difficult journey, but I won't let fear dictate my decisions." "Then you'll need a strategy," Janelle said, her expression shifting to one of consideration. "A way to connect with them, to help them see what's at stake." Carter interrupted, annoyance creeping back into his demeanor. "What are you doing, Janelle? She's playing at something that will end in failure. Do you really think you can motivate people who've given up on hope?" The tension was thick, as Grace felt every nuance of their dispute sharpen her focus. "I'm not just trying to motivate them," she interjected. "I want to inspire action. Hope without action is meaningless." Janelle's eyes flickered with respect. "You're ambitious, Grace. Ambition needs clarity. Do you know how to lead them?" "Not yet," Grace admitted, feeling the weights of uncertainty pressing down on her. "But I know I have to build trust, share my story, and help them confront their fears. If I can spark even a flicker of interest, that's more than they have now." For a moment, Janelle assessed Grace with a calculating gaze, and after what felt like an eternity, she nodded slightly. "Then let's discuss a plan. There's strength in collaboration, and perhaps together we can reach them." Carter's expression outright darkened. "You think there's strength in numbers?" "You'll fail, Grace," he scoffed. But she felt the resolve in her pulse, thrumming louder. "We'll see," she shot back. But as they began to discuss strategies, a new worry crept into her thoughts. Was Janelle truly an ally, or would this collaboration become another obstacle to navigate? The lines of trust were blurry, and with Carter looming as a threat, Grace sensed that the tipping point lay just beyond her grasp, waiting for the moment to reveal itself. A soft rustle diverted her focus as Janelle leaned closer, conspiratorially whispering, "We might need a backup plan for Carter. His opposition isn't merely a nuisance, it's a wall you'll have to break through." And with that revelation hanging in the air, Grace felt a swell of potential flood through her. Change was no longer a lofty dream. It was rapidly becoming a reality. But what if Carter had something to hold over her? An unseen ace that could twist her plans into chaos. Janelle's suggestion lingered like smoke, ethereal yet suffocating, and Grace felt her heart race with both excitement and an undercurrent of fear. The room had suddenly transformed into a battlefield. Words had become weapons, and alliances were fragile. "We need to thread carefully," Janelle said, breaking the tension with practicality. "Carter has influence, and he's not above deploying it." Grace nodded, the weight of this new reality settling on her shoulders. She hadn't envisioned the challenges she'd face, but now they loomed larger. "So, we devise a plan that relies on subtlety then? A strategy to counter him without igniting an outright conflict?" "Precisely," Janelle responded, her tone steady. "Understanding your opposition is vital. Carter's tactics are manipulative. He exploits fear, doubt, and complacency." As Grace absorbed her words, she felt the embers of her earlier determination glow bright. "If I can confront those fears openly, maybe I can weaken his power over them," she posited. This thought ignited a flicker of innovation in her mind. Was it possible to turn the tide using vulnerability as strength? Janelle seemed to ponder the idea. "That's a double-edged sword. Exposing insecurities can resonate, but it also risks backlash if not framed correctly. People remember pain. They shy away from what feels uncomfortable." Grace's mind raced through every conversation she hadn't had yet. Each harbored hope, twinging with the ghosts of expectation. What if I shared my own struggles? It might help others see that they aren't alone. If I can make them feel, they might respond with a desire to act. Janelle glanced away momentarily, a small smile hinting at the corners of her mouth. "That's not a bad strategy, but it requires the perfect balance. You must show your strength without revealing too much vulnerability, or they may see you as weak." Grace's burgeoning confidence began to settle into clarity. "I'll prepare a narrative, something authentic that reflects not only my journey, but connects with their undertones of despair and yearning for change. I want them to know it's okay to feel lost." Janelle clapped her hands once, breaking into a spirited mood. "Let's work on this together. We can refine your message, perhaps even brainstorm ways to engage the audience. Think of it as an experiment to see what resonates." As they dove into a brainstorming session, Grace lost herself in the thrill of creation, excitement ebbing and flowing like waves upon the shore. Every idea that flowed between them felt less like a lesson in tactics and more like weaving together the threads of a strong tapestry ready for unveiling. But amidst this creative surge, a gnawing doubt respected its place within her thoughts. Was this plan comprehensive enough? What if Carter intercepted their intentions and retaliated with a campaign of misinformation? Just as Grace was about to voice her concerns, the tension in her shoulders accumulated into a tight knot as she recognized moments when Janelle's excitement began to mirror her own doubts. Gradually, she understood that the fear and uncertainty that gripped her also bled into Janelle's optimism. There was a weight in their budding alliance that both women seemed to acknowledge silently. "We can't ignore Carter," Grace eventually managed out, directing the conversation back to the impending opposition. "He won't just sit back and let our voices grow." "Then, let's prepare for his moves," Janelle replied, steel creeping back into her demeanor as she reasserted control. "We'll define a contingency plan, but it starts with you, the voice they'll rally behind. I want you to write down your journey, your truth." As Grace started crafting her narrative, she felt energy converge on manifesting her identity. Apparently, her life experience could serve as a beacon for others. The thought steadied her, and yet a voice in her head whispered doubts. That night, alone in her cluttered apartment, Grace took a deep breath, spending hours drafting the first few sentences of her story. Each word brought with it a reminder of her resilience, stitching together confidence with the past. It stung, yet it was perfect. But as she sat surrounded by crumpled pages and half-formed ideas, a disturbing realization crept in. What if her vulnerability only reaffirmed what Carter had told her? What if it was all a charade that unraveled her attempt to inspire? The next phase of her journey loomed ahead, a public declaration that could either ignite a fire of hope or bear the bitter weight of exposure. Determined, Grace resolved to confront this fear by seeking clarity in the face of uncertainty. Tomorrow, she'd meet Janelle to finalize their strategies. But now, under the weight of revelation, she knew the most daunting challenge awaited her: how to reclaim her narrative before Carter twisted it beyond recognition. And as the moon cast shadows across her room, Grace felt the stakes elevate. Would her truth be strong enough to pierce through the darkness? Or would it become just another chapter lost to the void of silence? As dawn broke over Grace's apartment, she felt the heft of her thoughts weighing against her like the early morning fog clinging to the trees outside. The uncertainties she had embraced last night now spiraled into a pressing urgency. The looming confrontation with Carter felt inescapable, a shadow creeping closer with each pulse of her heart. Gazing around her cluttered space, Grace's eyes landed on a crumpled page on the floor. It served as a stark reminder of her struggle, yet instead of retreating into self-doubt, she found herself drawn to a greater awareness of her purpose. It was time to distill her narrative into something potent, something that could shatter the facade Carter had built. She pictured a room full of attentive listeners, leaning in, eager to connect. Could vulnerability serve as a bridge rather than a crack? This question formed the nucleus of her energy, compelling her to sit at her desk and immerse herself in the task at hand. With each keystroke, she wove in threads of courage, moments where her strength had faltered yet miraculously held firm. She recounted the fears she had felt when she first ventured into this space, how invisible forces had challenged her resolve time and again. The words flowed like a river carving through rock, reshaping her understanding of what it meant to be resilient. "But what if I'm not enough?" The whisper of doubt interjected. Grace paused, her fingers suspended above the keys. The realization struck her. Every individual she aimed to reach had faced the same question. In that instant, she recognized her unique position. Her experiences could lighten the burdens of others, might even allow them to see their own shadows. Pushing through the intrusive thoughts, Grace added passages that illustrated not merely her challenges, but her responses. How she had harnessed the very fears that once pinned her down as rungs of a ladder leading toward growth. As minutes turned into hours, the narrative transformed into a manifestation of her inner strength. Just as she began to feel a sense of accomplishment, the nagging realization of Carter's influence crept back in like a chill on an otherwise warm day. What if he took her words and twisted them, using them to redefine her intentions to paint her as weak? It was a valid concern, one that many might regard as factual. Suddenly, the relationship between strength and vulnerability wove itself into complex patterns of thought. If she faltered now, how easily could her message be misconstrued? The roar of her doubts escalated into an overwhelming crescendo of anxiety. Grace stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor, a sharp contrast to her distressing mental cacophony. She paced back and forth, tearing through her internal conflicts with fervor. Could she internalize Carter's narrative while smuggling in her own? The answer appeared to Grace as a crystalline thought. Reframing her message with intentional clarity would be essential. She could craft a transparent discourse that accentuated her authority alongside her humanity. If she guided the narrative deftly, perhaps she could shield her truth from Carter's distorting lens. With renewed determination, Grace began mapping out her strategy on a large sheet of paper. She outlined key points, variables she could emphasize to point her audience toward the lesson rather than the wound. Connect with them, she muttered to herself as a mantra. Show them a vision. The process was exhilarating, intoxicating even, allowing the flames of her ambition to flicker and expand. Each written point sparked further research into methods of effective storytelling, illuminating pathways that resonated with her deeper understanding of the human experience. She realized she had inhabited her role as an influencer long before she even knew the full extent of her capacity. Yet even as her excitement peaked, A darker thought loomed on the peripheral. What if this wasn't enough? What if Carter's arsenal of deception proved too clever, too manipulative, dismantling her carefully constructed framework before it even took flight? Grace shook her head, attempting to dispel the doubt, but knowing fully that it wouldn't dissolve easily. The hour approached for her meeting with Janelle, an inflection point of collaboration and reinforcement. As she prepared to leave, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. The reflection was steady and resolute, yet inside, the storm brewed. Would her narrative rise to the occasion, or would it be just another flicker of light extinguished in the flood of adversity? With deliberate breaths, Grace gathered her papers and stepped into the stillness of the day. Her mission clear, but the path still fraught with peril. Arriving at the cafe where she and Janelle had agreed to meet, Grace could feel the tremors of unease shift inside her, a potent reminder of the battles that lay ahead. Finding strength in their collective ambition was paramount. The moment of truth was drawing near. A confrontation with shadows on the horizon awaited them both. What awaited her in that exchange? Would they fortify a plan that could withhold the pressure of Carter's influence, or would it shatter her hopes of reclamation? Grace pushed through the cafe door, the scent of brewed coffee and fresh pastries mingling with her anxiety. She scanned the room, spotting Janelle at a corner table, deep in thought as she absent-mindedly stirred her drink. The sight of her friend stirred a sense of warmth within Grace, a flicker of reassurance in the storm of her thoughts. As she approached, Janelle looked up, her face lighting up in a smile. "You made it. I was starting to think Carter stole you away," she joked lightly, but the underlying tension was palpable. Grace offered a feeble laugh, easing into the chair opposite Janelle. "Hardly. Just wrestling with my own thoughts," she admitted, laying out her notes in front of her. "I've been thinking about how to frame everything, how to connect with people without getting lost in my fears." Janelle leaned forward, her expression shifting to one of understanding. "That's the essence, isn't it? Vulnerability. It's what makes your story relatable," she encouraged, a firm belief shining in her eyes. Grace nodded, feeling the weight of that truth. Yet, uncertainty still curled in her stomach. Would laying herself bare truly shield her from Carter's weaponization of her narrative? But what if it backfires? What if he twists my words to frame me as weak? The question spilled out, almost against her will. "That's a risk you have to take. The truth has a force of its own," Janelle replied, her tone deliberate. "You need to own your narrative. Remember, no one can distort your experiences as successfully as you can articulate them." The encouragement settled into Grace's mind, planting seeds of determination amid her turmoil. She reached for her notes, reviewing the key points she'd written overnight, projecting confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Let's break it down together," Janelle suggested, and Grace felt an electrifying charge in the air, their synergy igniting her own resolve. "What's the heart of your story?" Taking a deep breath, Grace pulled her thoughts together. "It's about resilience and the strength that comes from vulnerability," she articulated, feeling the weight of her words. "How I faced adversity head-on, and how each challenge shaped me into who I am today." "Perfect," Janelle replied, nodding enthusiastically. "Now, how do you want to position that against Carter's narrative?" "What if I highlight the triumph over my struggles rather than just the struggles themselves?" Grace proposed, discovering new layers within herself. It might be more powerful to frame it as a journey toward strength. Their discussion unfolded like a vibrant tapestry, each thread of conversation weaving in strategies to confront the perceived notion of her weakness. Janelle's insights filtered through Grace's growing confidence, spurring her mind to illuminate ways to underscore her authority. Amidst their brainstorming, a fleeting thought washed over Grace. Could she genuinely reflect the strength of her experience without diluting her vulnerability? It stirred her apprehension, a gnawing voice whispering that she might still leave herself exposed. But something had shifted within her. Moments of clarity emerged. elucidating past encounters where she had silenced doubters with her command over her story. The narrative belonged to her, and it was time to seize it. Suddenly, her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her focus. It was a message from Carter, the familiar tension tightening around her chest like a vice. "We need to talk about your presentation." The words hung in the air, electrifying and ominous. Grace felt her heart race. His influence seeped into her thoughts as bile rose within her. "Are you all right?" Janelle asked, concern knitting her brow. Grace swallowed hard, the weight of the day pressing down. "I need to confront him, face this storm head-on." "Then let's fortify your narrative now. You're not going at this alone," Janelle urged firmly. The weight of that commitment anchored Grace, pulling her out of the spiraling doubt. Resolving to craft her presentation not just as a platform for her story, but as an arsenal against Carter's Machiavellian tactics, she felt a surge of purpose. With newfound clarity, she dove back into their discussion, focusing on every word that would shimmer like armor against critique. Together, they hammered out a plan, a narrative that would effectively preempt the twists Carter might deploy. As they plotted, Grace felt a swell of potential, but also the chilling awareness of what awaited her. Confronting Carter loomed ahead like a formidable mountain, an ascent fraught with danger but necessary for her reclamation. What if this was the moment everything changed for her, both for better and worse? Was she truly ready to step into the light, exposing herself to scrutiny while dismantling a carefully constructed deception? The clock ticked on, and as they wrapped up their session, Grace realized Carter's response could either ignite or extinguish the flame she hoped to foster. "When we present, it begins our fight back," Janelle said, a steely resolve mirroring Grace's internal battle. She nodded, but apprehension laced her gut. Would her narrative unlock doors, or close them forever? Each twist and turn was a reflection of her own inner journey, and as fear pressed against her mind, she felt the inevitability of confrontation closing in. What awaited her in that face-to-face exchange with Carter? Grace stared at her phone, the words from Carter consuming her thoughts with a tidal wave of anxiety. The cafe around her faded, coffee beans and chatter blurring into an indistinct hum. She could feel Janelle's eyes assessing her, searching for signs of the storm swirling inside. "Are you ready for this?" Janelle's voice cut through the haze. The question hung in the air, heavy with both concern and encouragement. "I have to be," Grace replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The truth was simple. This confrontation with Carter was no longer just about the presentation. It had morphed into something far more personal. It was a pivotal moment, an intersection where her past and future collided uncomfortably. Sitting tall, she revisited the lessons learned through her arduous journey, the empowerment birthed from sharing her vulnerabilities. But now, she also sensed something deeper at stake, her authenticity against the backdrop of Carter's manipulation. "Let's run through your key points again," Janelle prompted, her determination contagious. "We can sharpen your message to cut through his potential distractions." Grace nodded, bringing her scattered thoughts into focus. With each point articulated, she felt a spark ignite within her, a flicker of resilience that pushed back the panic. She remembered Janelle's words about vulnerability. Suddenly, laying her truth bare didn't seem like a risk. Instead, it represented the essence of her power. "Okay," she began, her heart steadying with purpose. "I need to articulate how overcoming challenges has shaped my leadership style. Highlighting my journey will not only showcase my strengths, but also dismantle his narrative. Each struggle is a stepping stone to growth, not weakness." "Exactly," Janelle said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "You're turning the fear he instills into fuel for your message. Let's then weave in that element, how facing adversity forged your resolve. It tells a story of triumph, rather than defeat." Grace's thoughts sharpened. "And I can frame his tactics as mere distractions thrown against someone who perseveres, who knows that true strength emerges from the depths of vulnerability." The realization propelled her deeper into self-awareness, allowing clarity in the fog of apprehension. She felt a swell of determination, a realization of how far she had come. She wasn't the frightened girl from a year ago. She was a force defined by her past, not shackled by it. As they continued to brainstorm, Janelle encouraged Grace to visualize the encounter with Carter. His familiar smirk, the way he dismissed her in meetings, it all became a backdrop to her narrative motivation. Using his tactics against him was now a subtle art form. It felt exhilarating to take control, to flip the script. What had been anxiety transformed into strategic empowerment, but beneath that excitement lurked a residual fear. What if she underestimated him? His influence had echoed with intimidation for so long that it was hard to fully shake off the echo. "Have you considered how you'll handle any curveballs he might throw?" Janelle asked, her brow knitted in earnest concern. "I'm starting to," Grace admitted, the weight of her confession settling heavily in the space between them. "Just picturing him challenging me stirs something deep, like the old habits of insecurity trying to resurface." "Then don't give them ground," Janelle encouraged, leaning in. "You're not just presenting, you're redefining your position. If he pushes back, it'll only illustrate his fear of your potential." Their conversation burgeoned with a shared momentum, stripping back layers of doubt and replacing them with a stark readiness. Grace felt herself ascend into a new identity, one that was decidedly distinct from the shadow of indecision that had clung to her. Finally, as they wrapped up their practice, tension spikes sparked through Grace in anticipation of the confrontation. It was not just a presentation. It was a declaration of self-worth, an assertion of her right to share her story. She was on the precipice of something profound. As the cafe bustled with a lively crowd, she exhaled deeply, trying to calm her racing heart. "Whatever happens, I have to do this. I owe it to myself." "You'll do great," Janelle assured her, "and I'll be right here cheering you on. Remember, it's not just about facing Carter. It's about facing who you've become." The words hung in the air like a vow. Grace sensed that something monumental loomed just ahead of her, an exchange not merely with Carter, but a confrontation with parts of herself. "Tomorrow, when I face him," she whispered almost to herself, "it'll change everything." The next morning held promise and peril stitched into its seams, and as Grace prepared for the day, one thought persisted. Facing Carter would not only unlock her narrative, but would also reveal the heart of a battle long brewing. Would she rise to meet it, or would the internal scars resurface once more? Dawn broke over the Wells estate, casting soft light through Grace's window. Today was the day she would confront her greatest fear, Carter Wells. As she mentally prepared, she felt the weight of yesterday's revelations squarely upon her shoulders. Each step toward the mansion resonated with purpose, her heart thumping in steady rhythm now, no longer filled with trepidation, but a burgeoning sense of revolution. Grace paused at the entrance, the tapestry of the past swirling in her mind, interwoven with the threads of her present resolve. She was not merely stepping into Carter's territory. She was reclaiming her narrative. Today, she would challenge the fortress of silence and submission she had inhabited for far too long. Inside, the mansion's grandeur was as imposing as ever, but this time, its opulence felt less like a barrier and more like a stage on which she would perform the greatest act of her life. As she approached the drawing room, the echoes of doubt that had once gnawed at her thoughts began to dissipate. She had crafted her story with Janelle's guidance, meticulously weaving in threads of resilience that turned vulnerability into empowerment. Carter stood with his back turned, his commanding presence filling the room as he addressed a corporate minion, discussing a complex financial maneuver that would have little concern for those beneath him. Grace took a deep breath. This was the moment. "Mr. Wells," she interrupted, her voice strong and unwavering. He turned, surprise flaring briefly in his eyes before he masked it with smirk. "And to what do I owe the honor, Grace?" he retorted. Condescension dripped from his words, I'm here to speak about the impact of your decisions, she declared, grounding herself. The lives you control, the futures you jeopardize, and the voices you silence. Carter leaned against the wall, arms crossed in bemusement. You think this is your place? He asked, his tone mocking. Such naive ambition is charming but misplaced. Grace shrugged off his disdain, locked in her resolve. It's actually quite appropriate, Mr. Wells. Those who capitalize on power often overlook the people affected by their choices. I'm here to give them a voice, to challenge your narrative. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. Yet behind it, Grace sensed something else. Fear. That realization expanded her courage, rendering her invincible against his scrutiny. Go on then. What's your grand idea? He sneered, challenging her with that familiar glimmer of disdain. First, I'm sharing my story, she began, her voice steady, emboldened by the very truth he attempted to suppress. I will show others that they're not merely pieces on your board. They're human beings with dreams, aspirations, and voices that matter. As Grace recounted her journey, she saw the change in his demeanor, an incremental loss of control. I have risen from silence and despair. I stand here today not just as a maid, but as a mother who understands the stakes. The world may cast me as invisible, but I now see a tapestry of individuals waiting to emerge from your shadows. He scoffed. Yet a hint of uncertainty flitted through his eyes, as he realized she was no longer the timid woman he controlled with wrath. She was wielding her vulnerability as a formidable weapon. I might be from modest beginnings, Grace pressed on, feeling a surge of strength. But I'm not defined by them. I'm creating a community culminating in trust and empowerment. Others will rise alongside me. The room's energy shifted palpably. Tension was thick. It was not merely a discourse, but an unveiling, disassembling the pillars of Carter's dominion. The truth is, your empire rests on the shoulders of the very people you dismiss. I intend to help them reclaim their own narrative and set forth a new course. Carter's posture faltered, the facade of the untouchable billionaire vibrating dangerously. The inexplicable chasm between his previous arrogance and this newfound awareness made it clear. He was no longer the only one orchestrating this encounter. As if propelled by an unseen force, Grace stepped back, contemplating the path ahead. She could see the maturation unfolding, not only in herself, but also in her future. She was not only fighting for her own dignity, but also for those unheard, the fabric of society that thrived beyond the walls of this estate. This stage was hers now, and she felt the warmth of clarity. You may believe you are invulnerable, but everyone has a breaking point. The more you attempt to tighten your grasp, the more people will find their wings. For a moment, silence stretched in the space between them, exposing the vulnerability Carter had cultivated through power. Just as the tension threatened to paralyze, his voice finally broke the quiet, tinged with uncertainty. And what if they resist? What then? A soft smile spread across Grace's face, an affirmation of renewal. I believe in the power of connection. I'll turn their fears into catalysts for growth. My mission is already underway, and it won't be dismantled by your skepticism. With that, the tides shifted irrevocably. Grace was no longer just the maid in the Wells estate. She was the harbinger of change, a leader whose resolve stirred in the hearts of the unnoticed. Today was not only about confronting Carter. It was about lifting the veil off her own self-worth, illustrating the growth and transformation that had crystallized within her, redefining her place in a world eager to stifle her voice. As Grace made her way out, she felt liberated, a striking distance from her past. The stakes had transformed, igniting a flame of hope in action. Her achievement was not just personal triumph, but a collective spark ready to catch. And that spark would soon engulf the very foundations upon which the Wells empire stood. Now more than ever, she understood the incredible power of storytelling. In articulating her truth, She had laid the groundwork to reshape perspectives, creating an atmosphere of resilience charged with relentless determination. It was time to rise and turn the tide. You need to subscribe now to this channel to witness how stories of personal triumph unfold. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and support these narratives of empowerment. Comment your reactions and theories about Grace's journey. What do you think will happen next? Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who are ready to move beyond limits. Don't wait even one more second to show them what is possible when we fight for our truth.